You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help
This
me,
is
Bob,
Inside
it's
the
bully
Village,
in the alley.
the end-of-year Part 1 version. Welcome to the show. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Pleased to be joined with, as always, Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media, Derek Turner, the gentleman who puts this show together for us each and every week here across our footprint, across the province of Ontario and beyond. Guys, do you believe it? Another season is in the books.
It's crazy to me. I think about us looking through we had a meeting the other day just to look at some of our past episodes on the website, and you forget about some of them, right? There were so many, and it's really topical issues we talked about, important issues, some of them a bit light, but a lot of really fascinating conversations we've had on the show.
And what's crazier is we've been picked up for a third season.
That's wild.
It's wild stuff.
I haven't seen any contract details.
Well, we have people to work out those details, Frisco. We won't bore you with the details, but
I don't know what that means, picked up.
Our representatives are dealing with... Anyway, you don't need to know all that stuff. We are here. We're excited. As you say, it's been an incredible year. So many different topics that we covered, and we're going to do our best in the next 30, 35 minutes to try and look back. And just like last year, if you've watched the show, we'll split it into two parts, kind of the heavier stuff for today, for part one, and then next week what we tend to refer to as the lighter side of the news.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it because we do cover kind of all kinds of different things, right? Some weeks we talk about a very serious issue, one that impacts Ontarians in a very deep way. And sometimes we just talk about something that's kind of gives you a laugh and sees the lighter side of the news. So like we did last year, I think it'll be fun to go through both sides and kind of see where we've been.
All right, let's fire it up and turn the clock back to early in 2023, in February, in fact, when QP Briefing became no more and Village Media swooped in and we launched the Trillium, which is the most comprehensive, extensive coverage of Queen's Park anywhere in the province.
To me, this is one of the great journalism stories of the year, right? I mean, people may forget it, but early in the year, QP Briefing, which was run by Torstar, they had a mass exodus of journalists who resigned over the fact that they weren't allowed to publish a particular article relating to Doug Ford. And obviously got a lot of attention in the journalism world, a lot of journalists concerned that the company would not allow them to publish this story, which was rigorously reported and accurate and truthful. And Jessica Smith-Cross and Charlie Pinkerton resigned as a result. And it was one of those things that happened really, really quickly. Jeff Elgie, our CEO, said, hey, maybe this is a group we should be talking to. And I think it was within 2 weeks we had the logo put together, the design all put together. We had the whole team on board and relaunched as the Trillium, which to me is the most comprehensive coverage at Queen's Park right now. It's been a fantastic site. Our local sites across the chain have enjoyed having their coverage daily. We have stories running across the chain every day from their reporting at Queen's Park. And these are the guys that have been, leading the way on coverage regarding the Greenbelt, regarding a lot of other important issues that happened at Queen's Park, which is the center of provincial politics, the center of power in Ontario. And to me, strictly journalism speaking, it's been a huge addition for our team to have that kind of heavyweight talent at Queen's Park. So it's definitely one of the things I look back on this year to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very big move on our part, and we were fortunate to land such a wonderful team led by Jessica Smith-Cross, as you alluded to, and one of the best in the business, Charlie Pinkerton.
Yeah, and there's also Aidan Shamandi there, Snay Dougal, Jack Cowan, just a fantastic team who bring us amazing coverage every day. The thing that, as the editor, that's been great to see too is our teams on the local markets are working with our provincial park teams, our Queen's Park teams at the provincial legislature. So they're throwing ideas off each other, they're asking for help, and it's vice versa. So sometimes our team at Queen's Park is asking the locals, hey, who do you know in this region that can help us with this story, or how can we push this story ahead? And it's just made for great coverage across the chain. And like I said, I mean, I don't really have a lot to do with it. I can't take credit for the amazing work they're doing, but it's awesome to see them being able to pull it off.
It certainly is, and soon after we launched, we caught up with Jessica and Charlie.
You guys were at QP Briefing a couple weeks ago, which was a property at one time owned by the Toronto Star, and then it was kind of one of the assets in the divorce between the two owners at the Star, and it eventually went to Paul Rivet. And at the time, Charlie, you were working on a pretty important story. Were you working on that story as the ownership changed? Let's talk about that first. What was the story you were working on?
Sure. So the story that I was working on was about, well, what's now known publicly about the premier's daughter's wedding festivities, that of her stag and doe and wedding, that developers, including some who have benefited from the government's decisions, including one in particular who is benefiting from its recent Greenbelt land swap. So they were at these wedding festivities for Premier Ford's daughter. This was something that I first caught wind of way back on August 12th, which was at the press conference where Doug Ford swallowed a bee. Somebody,
Wow.
yeah, it's ridiculous. But somebody had mentioned there that, hey, did you hear about this developers party at the Premier's house last night? And didn't really think much of it. The fall unfolded how it did in terms of policy and with the Greenbelt land swap. And it became something that towards, I guess, the end of last year, I started thinking about more seriously, and then really doing the work on throughout the month of January and into February as well.
And I think a lot of people who don't do what we do don't understand what that means, the kind of work you're doing. What kind of stuff were you doing in those weeks getting the story prepped?
Yeah, so I think I probably brought it up to Jess and others that I thought this was something worth exploring because of this, kind of tip that I heard way back when. In late December, a couple of weeks before, we had gotten back through a Freedom of Information request the Premier's daily calendars that the Cabinet Office keeps. And on the date that, again, I had reason to believe this happened, August 11th, that calendar showed it was blank with the exception of two, I believe, redacted items for personal reasons, and then a big section that was literally labeled block. And so what that means is that that's for, items or commitments kept outside of the official calendar. So that kind of spurred on suspicions. Then had another Freedom of Information request come back that was very carefully targeted to try to find out where the Premier was or what he was doing on that date, August 11th. That yielded no records. And so that allowed me and our whole team to really kind of pick things up in the new year of trying to suss it out and start talking to people who might know something about it. And so that work then, took a month.
And Jessica, again, maybe an obvious question for us, but to people who may not understand, why is it, as the editor, that's such an important story? Is it something that you want your team to be working on?
It's one of the huge themes of criticism of this government has been how close the Premier is to developers, to industry in general, but especially with the development industry. And he's been facing a lot of charges about making decisions that are friendly to those folks who share his interests. The development of the Greenbelt itself, a lot of different municipal zoning orders. So these are times when the province can step in and make it a development that might not otherwise go ahead locally. It's a huge source of criticism of the Premier. So when Charlie was able to show that developers, big ones in the industry, attended the wedding, and that there was this event where it appears that they were paying for the privilege of being at this event that the Premier was at, it's a huge ethical issue. And that's why, since the story has broken, it's the talk of everything at Queen's Park right now.
I have to say, Scott, one of the best pleasures of this job has been able to speak to Charlie and Jessica and the rest of the team over there on a regular basis, just hearing the stuff they're working on and how stories are coming together and just how passionately they cover the province and the politics at play. It's amazing to see every day. It gives me a lot of energy, and we're really, really fortunate to have them here, and so are our readers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as you know, we launched a new feature called Trillium Talk, where every week we talk to one of the reporters, and they are just so great to deal with, so knowledgeable, and you can tell that they are very in tune with what is going on at the legislature.
And I'd remind our readers, Sunday mornings at Trillium Talk. We had a couple Monday morning episodes, but we're going back to Sunday morning, Trillium Talk. It is really fantastic. And I have to say, their personalities really come out on that show, right? You really see who they are and just how passionate they are about what they do. It's a great segment.
All right, let's fast forward to the 1st of May, and sadly, the death of a Canadian folk legend, Gordon Lightfoot, at the age of 84 years of age.
Yeah, certainly one of the biggest passings we dealt with in the country this year. just the outpouring of love and affection for him, and fascinating to me to watch because we run sites in various markets, just the stories coming out of each site. Obviously in Orillia, where Dave Dawson, the editor there in our team, really covered it hard because he's from Orillia. He's Orillia's favorite son. But also in Sault Ste. Marie, where the Edmund Fitzgerald nearby went down, the museums across the border, and talking to people here. I believe Ken Armstrong did a story about how one of his songs was inspired by Bellevue Park here. Stories I'd never heard of, right? Just seeing them come together. And what was great was being able to reach out to Dave Dawson and Orillia and saying, hey, Dave, we want to do a real special episode of Inside the Village. Who do you recommend that we can have on?
And we had a wonderful conversation with Pam Carter, who heads up the Mariposa Folk Festival in Orillia, and Karen Hilfram-Milson, who she had known Gordon for years, a retired United Church minister who actually performed his funeral for family and friends. And it was just a wonderful retrospective conversation with two people who knew Gordon very, very well.
Who just knew him and loved him like so many others did. And just being able to speak to people. It's one thing to speak to fans who loved his music, but to speak to two women who knew him so well and worked with him over the years on various things. It was a really powerful episode, and I thought it brought some great stories to the table that maybe people didn't know. And I have to, I don't want to be biased, but it was one of the more enjoyable conversations we had this year, despite the sadness of losing Gordon Lightfoot, to be able to pay tribute to him in that way.
Absolutely, and you're right. They shared so many great stories. Let's hear from one of them now. Karen, let's start with the service this past Monday. Can you kind of walk us through it and what it was like?
For me, things began as we brought his casket in, which was actually on the Sunday before the visitation. And as per tradition, the minister walks in front of the casket, clearing a pathway of light and love and surrounding our loved one with that energy. And I was doing that. And as I was walking forward, I had tears just pouring down my face because we were bringing Gord home. His singing career began at St. Paul's as a very young boy in the choir. And so we were, and the fact that he chose to come home for the visitation and chose to come home for the funeral was deeply moving for all of us, and such an affirmation of what the community did in supporting him. And such an important thing for all of us to remember that, we had a Gordon Lightfoot amongst us as a whole community, and supported him through the Kiwanis Festival, through the church choir, through the high school, his singing in the high school, in the quartet, and his singing in public school. We all surrounded him and supported him, and that's what we need to be doing for each other all around. Whatever our gifts are, whatever our strengths are, we need to be supporting one another and encouraging one another like that. And so the awareness of how profoundly that start was for him made everything that happened at St. Paul's really, really special for us here in Orillia, but for us also as Canadians to recognize the importance of our hometowns.
The one thing I'll tell you about Gordon Lightfoot, and as you guys know, I've come from a radio background, and I used to work at an oldies station. And of course, in this country, you're mandated to play a certain amount of Canadian content every hour as per the CRTC. And I used to love when Gordon's songs would come up on the playlist. Just so many. Crank the studio speakers and just sing away like nobody was watching, usually off key. But man, I loved his music, and I know this country misses him. Okay, let's change gears here. The opioid crisis continues in 2023, sadly, to be a defining story that you and your team have covered relentlessly.
It feels like it's been a story now for a good decade now. It seems to be every year the numbers get higher, the number of people being killed by toxic drugs, the number of people trying to figure out how to help people who are struggling with these addictions, the number of stories about efforts to get these kind of drugs off the streets. It's like a never-ending battle. And the one thing that I always look for is there a community around that's doing something right, that's figured out maybe a part of the solution? We really haven't seen that yet, but one of the things that is helping in some of our communities are safe consumption sites, right? These are places where people can go and use drugs under the safe, watchful eye of professionals. So they know that if there's a potential of overdose, there's people there to help them. They don't have to worry about their things being stolen if they, when they wake up, that everything's going to be gone. It's really a safe place for people who are struggling with addiction to go and use drugs. It's not a place where drugs are given to these people.
No.
It's a place where they can go, no judgment, and use these substances. One of those places is the Spot in Sudbury. We have other sites across Ontario, but one of them is the Spot. And like some of them in Northern Ontario, their funding is running out at the end of the year because they haven't been given provincial funding yet, even though they exist. And the Spot is one of those high-profile locations because there's literally a countdown clock on their website. They're advocating hard to say, hey, we're going to run out of funding by the end of the year. I think it was you had mentioned this earlier, that a company in Sudbury has actually funded the January to give them some money to stay open in January. But this is an organization that's doing good work, that's fighting to save lives. And we did a whole episode talking to a representative from the Spot about what they're doing there and why it's important.
Yeah, and I think what was shocking is they applied for the funding over 2 years ago and still waiting. But you're right, we had a wonderful conversation with Amber Fritz, who is the manager of the Spot, and she had some very informative and enlightening things to tell us.
Right, let's talk funding. Okay, so you've been around for about eight or 9 months, is that correct?
Our 1 year anniversary is the 28th of this month.
Okay, so almost a year. And it was funded by the city?
The city of Greater Sudbury, yes.
With the expectation that you would apply for funding to the province and eventually be funded fully by the province? Is that the hope?
So Rezo Access Network, which is the organization that runs the supervised consumption site, we applied for funding from the provincial government to become a consumption and treatment services site. So when you have funding for a site from the province of Ontario, it's no longer called a supervised consumption site. It's referred to as a consumption and treatment services site. So we applied for funding August the 27th, 2021.
Oh, man.
Wow.
So more than 2 years ago.
Yes. So the city of Greater Sudbury stepped in. We are extremely grateful that they did. We would not be operating otherwise. So kudos to the city. But yes, it was temporary funding. It was like, okay, the application has been submitted. The city is going to fund us, and then the province is going to fund us. We submitted our application. So unfortunately, to date, we have not received word. We haven't been told no, mind you, but we have not received confirmation that we will, in fact, receive this funding.
And no indication of a timeline either, if I recall.
Right.
And so what's the city paying in the meantime to keep you open?
Off the top of my head, I should, but off the top of my head, I actually don't know that number. But I think it might be in the media somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably out there, but it's definitely a significant amount of money. It's not $5 a week. It's a lot of money, right? And the Sudbury got into the funding with the expectation too that there would be some provincial funding. So is the city's funding set to expire at the end of the year?
Yeah, that's my understanding, that our funding expires on December the 31st of this year.
So what do you think is happening, Amber? Why is it taking more than 2 years to get an answer from the province?
I couldn't tell you. I really don't know. We submitted our application. There are other communities, not quite as long as us, but there are other communities that are waiting on word as well. We've been told that our application has been received and that it's under review. And so it's just basically been a waiting game.
So how worrying is this? I mean, you're 3 months away, basically, a little more than 3 months away from the end of the year. How concerned are you that you may have to close your doors in January?
Concerned would be an understatement. I am absolutely terrified. Any service like this takes time. It takes time to kind of find its niche. It takes time to gain the trust of a community that is often, not treated all that great by services. And we're finally, we had a record-breaking month last month. We're already, on track to have more visits than we did last month. So more people are coming in, more new folks are coming in, and we're really finding our footing. And now there's a chance that we may no longer be able to do that. So just as soon as people get comfortable with the place and we have, more visits and more new people coming in, then there's a chance it may no longer be available. And I just feel that would, almost break some of the trust that we've worked so hard to build. It's like, hey, I thought you guys were going to be here for me and now you're gone.
Yes, yeah.
And I've already had staff starting to resign because they don't have job security, which I completely understand and fully support. I actually just received a resignation from a full-time staff today, which I expected to happen because, of course, people need a job. It's just, everything's up in the air. So we're doing what we can.
Hard to believe, Frisco, that 2 years ago they asked the province for money and still waiting. And as you mentioned, Valley in Sudbury has stepped up to the tune of $75,000 to fund the spot for at least the month of January. What happens after that, who knows?
We'll be watching it closely, especially our team in Sudbury.com.
Absolutely. Okay, one of the more tragic stories that we've ever covered on this program or across Village Media, just an awful shooting in Sault Ste. Marie that left 5 people dead, including 3 children.
Yeah, this was I'd say it's one of the most tragic stories in the province this year. And it just so happened to be in our backyard. We're in Sault Ste. Marie where we record this podcast. It was here. As everyone remembers, it happened on a Monday night. We went to bed that night knowing that there was a heavy police presence at 2 homes in Sault Ste. Marie. By the next morning, we had learned, sadly, that 3 children had been killed, that a woman had been killed, and that the gunman had taken his own life. So 5 people dead, including the gunman. And these things just don't happen in a community like this. We just don't hear of these kind of things. And what made it an even more pressing story was early on, the police said this was a case of intimate partner violence.
Right.
That this gunman had been called, that there had been calls regarding this gunman in the days prior about intimate partner violence. We now know, sadly, that the woman he killed was an ex-girlfriend, that the children he killed were his own 3 children. Mm-hmm. We know that the mother of the children was also shot but survived before he turned the gun on himself. So you have one of those stories in our communities where this sounds silly, but you kind of think, well, this happens in Toronto or bigger cities in Ontario, but it happened in the Soo, a town of 75,000 people. So you have those moments where it didn't take long before everybody knew who was involved, right? Everybody had a connection to the children, to the woman who was tragically killed, to the shooter himself. And then the challenge for us was, how do we cover this in the right way and make sure we're showing, we're providing the information that the community needs to know, while also respecting the fact that the surviving mother in this case is the victim of the worst kind of domestic violence possible, and she's still alive, and those are her children that have been killed. A very challenging story to cover, one that we talked about all day long, every day that we were covering this, about how we do it, and what's
still talking about
it today. It's just something that because there's still information that continues to come out, right? Just last week or 2 weeks ago, the police put out a release saying that they've identified the 2 types of guns that were seized, and they still don't know how this person obtained these guns. So there's still very much an active investigation going on, and I just think people look to community news organizations like Sault Today in this case for what's going on, right? And it's a huge burden and a huge responsibility to do it the right way. And I know we had a lot of emails and phone calls with people thinking we did it right and people thinking we didn't do it the right way. But I feel like overall, when I look back at the way we covered this, we did it as respectfully as possible, but also knowing that we had to tell people what was happening.
And it was less than 48 hours after that tragedy that Robin Kerr was kind enough to come into the studio and sit down. Of course, Robin, the Executive Director of Victim Services Algoma here in Sault Ste. Marie. And the work that she and everyone in her organization does is you just can't say enough good things about what they do.
I mean, it's a group of people who respond just like the police and firefighters do. They're on the scene when there's a terrible tragedy to help the victims left behind, whether it's someone who's survived or a loved one wondering what happened. And they responded to this terrible incident. So it was really an eye-opener to listen to what they deal with, what they go through, and what her thoughts were on the tragedy. It was one of the most powerful interviews we did this year. Well, we recently saw the results of the public inquest, or the coroner's inquest, into what happened in Renfrew County, where 3 women were killed a few years ago by the same partner. There were many recommendations that came out of that, and one of the main ones was that the province declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. That hasn't happened. Does that frustrate you?
It does. It does. It's a recommendation that will cost nothing to make that happen. And I've had conversations with our local Algoma Public Health. The public health agencies are not pushing back saying that this isn't an epidemic. They're fine locally if we make that determination. And I think provincially it needs to happen. So it would help our victims who are trying to flee these relationships and the violence to know that their communities and their province stands with them, that we do recognize that it's not safe for them to be in their homes. And it might also help the accused realize that, maybe I can reach out for help and I'm not going to be ostracized, so that they can maybe look at their behaviors as well.
Does it need to happen provincially first, Robin, or does that matter?
It doesn't matter. Currently, there are cities, I believe the last number I read was 62 across the province have declared it an epidemic. And I know locally we're looking at it as well. And I hope that the smaller communities along in the Algoma district will also look at this and make it happen across the area. But showing it from the province would certainly help reinforce any community that is trying to make this decision.
Has anyone ever tried to explain to you quietly from the province why they won't do it? It just seems like, I understand why the governments won't do a lot of things, but like you said, there's no real issue with doing this.
No, I've never had a conversation with anyone as to why it won't happen.
Yeah, and because Ross Reynolds, who are local MPP here in Sault Ste. Marie, they're hosting a vigil tonight, a candlelight vigil. It's his government. Do you think this could be something that maybe pushes them over the edge?
I'd hate to say it because of the tragedy that's happened here, that's why they've now decided to do it. But I hope they seriously look at it, because between Renfrew and here now, those are two major cases, plus what happened in Nova Scotia a few years. And the number one recommendation that came out of that was the very same thing. Let's list this as an epidemic. And so I'm hoping that Ontario will look at it.
When we come back on Inside the Village, the year that was 2023, Part 1, we'll talk about the cost of living and the impact that has had right across the province of Ontario and the country for that matter, and a little C18. That's next when Inside the Village returns, right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. It's part 1 of our year in review, the year that was 2023, with Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media, Derek Turner, our executive producer. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Okay, one of the biggest topics, and we talked about this numerous times throughout the year, and it's kind of an all-encompassing conversation that has to do with the cost of living, inflation, the cost of groceries, the cost of the cost of fill in the blank.
Of everything.
It just seemed to consume all of us throughout 2023.
It has to be the story of the year, if not one of the stories of the year, right? The cost of living it's everywhere across the province, across the country, but specifically in our markets across Ontario, people are just struggling in ways they haven't in a long time. The grocery bills have gone through the roof. We've talked to different guests about that issue. We talked to guests about inflationary pressures and what the Bank of Canada should be doing to try to bring down inflation. We've talked about how it impacts housing, how it impacts rent, and one of the most interesting ones was we talked about how it impacts the restaurant business, right? Because restaurants are feeling the inflationary pressures. They're feeling the cost of their supplies going up. And consumers are feeling that when they go to restaurants now, not only are the prices going up, but they're not really happy with what they're getting. What's the term that?
Shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation, right? That the plates aren't as quite full as they used to be. So just kind of seeing it from all sides. And it is the reality. I mean, it's what people are talking about right now. Just everything's going up. And we just saw everyone across Ontario is pretty much getting a property tax increase now. Every community, property taxes are up. So it's just the one comment we get all the time on our sites is, when's it going to end? Yeah. When am I going to catch a break? Nothing's gone down.
One of my most favorite guests this year was an accountant, in fact, an insolvency trustee out of Southern Ontario, and we spoke to him about the annual report that his company puts out. The report is called Joe Debtor, and the guest name was Ted Michaelos, and he was colorful. He was kind of the anti-accountant.
Yes.
Not the black and white. He was just an incredible personality, and we had a great chat with Ted.
Ted, the thing that we were just talking about before you came on that really struck me about the study is that over half of insolvent debtors have at least one rapid high-cost loan. And we look at those high-cost loans that can typically carry a minimum interest rate between 29.99% and 59.99%. Wow. And, we all kind of know these exist, right? But we just don't give them a lot of thought. I mean, who are these guys that are running these companies that are giving loans at this rate? And why are people being approved for them, I guess? I guess it's desperation, right?
Well, it is. I mean, there used to be an old saying, if a bank won't give you money, then you shouldn't be borrowing. Mm-hmm. These fellows, they fill a market niche that the banks just can't satisfy. So you can apply for one of these loans while you're watching TV and sitting, eating popcorn in front of the television. You can do it in the middle of the night. They make it very easy to borrow, and they're just very difficult to repay. Mm-hmm. And so the rapid loans are quite upsetting, but the worst type of this loan we haven't hit on yet, and those are the payday loans, because they have interest rates up to 390% annually.
What?
Payday loans are specifically exempt from the usury laws in the criminal code. So the reason those other loans are restricted to 59.99% is because at 60% it's criminal. So payday loans aren't part of those laws. So if you really want to have an exciting show one day, get me going on payday loans.
Well, let's get going on it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I feel stupid I didn't get to that point. I mean, that's insane. And so if you're exempt from the criminal code, they're basically just giving these guys blanket leeway to be the mafia.
Yep. I mean, there is legislation in place. There are regulations they have to follow, but they're easily circumvented. So I'll give you an example. I mean, they're allowed to advertise that you can go in and borrow $100 for $15 for the first loan. So 2 weeks later, you owe them $115. Annualized, that works out to 390%. And so the problem isn't the one loan. It's that once you get this loan because you didn't have the money, when payday comes around and you pay it off, you got to borrow the money again. And then you borrow the money again. The average person that we saw in 2022 had 4 of these loans, and they total up to $12,000 once you cover out that whole rapid loan category. So payday loans, installment loans, high interest loans on the internet.
Is there an element of addiction to it because it is so easy to acquire?
I don't think addiction's probably the right term. There's certainly a dependence. Once you get one, you're stuck getting a second one, and then a third one, and then a fourth one. I mean, it's because there's no way to break the cycle.
The beauty of that conversation with Ted is he's such a relatable guy, and he's able to, I hesitate to use the term, but I will for our benefit, dumb things down so the guys like us get it. It was just a great conversation.
Yeah, and I feel like he was excited to have it, to be honest, because he deals with, that's a tough job where you're dealing with people looking across the table from you saying, I'm in a terrible financial situation. I need some help. I need to figure out how to get out of this without filing for bankruptcy. And he's helping them, right? So it's kind of an opportunity for him to have a lighter side. The one thing I'll point out is that the one thing that has not gone up in cost are Village Media's local news websites. You can log on for free anytime you want. We'll never charge you a penny to read the news in your local community.
Very well said. One thing that we did cover an awful lot of in 2023 were various social issues, whether it was dementia. I think back to Noah Irvine from the Guelph area, who lost both of his parents to drug addiction, and his wonderful story and crusade and the advocacy work that he is doing. And then there was the story of a Calgary-based company who's now expanded to Ontario, Hope's Cradle.
Yeah, an organization. I don't think they were a company, but yes, an organization. Yeah, for sure. This is a really fascinating story. It's an opportunity for people who are in the worst possible scenarios. They're struggling. They don't think they can take care of the child they have. As she explained to us, whether they're being victimized by human trafficking, whether they're just struggling socially or financially, it's a place to safely drop your baby with no questions asked. And so these have been installed in like fire halls in communities where there's literally a drawer that you can put the child in, and it signals an alarm, a silent alarm, so that someone can show up and check the baby. And it was a super powerful conversation. Yep. But what was fascinating about it was, as long as they didn't see any signs of abuse or crimes committed against the child, there were no questions asked. They didn't go looking for anybody.
No judgment.
No judgment at all. And it's an opportunity basically to save this child. And I think it was a community, I don't remember, there's near Oshawa that's starting it. And Sault Ste. Marie's looking at that possibility, bringing it in. And again, it's just what I always say about this show. It's not a soundbite. It was a chance to have an in-depth conversation with somebody who's been working with this organization and founded it and been making it happen for a long time, and really talk about what it's about, as opposed to someone who might read that headline and say, whoa, what's going on there? And from reading the story, you mentioned Sault Ste. Marie is looking at this possibility. We run Sault Today, which is one of the local sites we have, and they've written about it. And one of the things that interests me is that a mother can come back within 30 days and say, I made a mistake. And how would they do that?
that information is in the envelope you leave with them?
Yes, there is information in the envelope, but this is something that I really love about that. And it's kind of moving along the lines of what happens with adoption. Mm-hmm. So with adoption, there's 30 days to be able to change their mind, and it changes per province. But we are moving forward with that 30-day policy. And the concept with this, again, if we go back to women surviving or existing in abuse, they have that time, that grace period, if the baby is in imminent danger, to be able to place their baby here anonymously, find safety, make a situation that the baby can exist in, and then come back for their baby as well. And to date, we haven't had anyone use the cradles for that, but I hope that someday it does get used for that, because you hear too many times that a mother knew her baby was in danger, and then the baby ends up passing away because of some horrific thing happening to it. And I hope that our cradles get utilized for this as well.
Jordan, how gratifying is this for you? I mean, like you said, you worked a long time trying to make this happen, and now you're seeing it expand. Actually, it's growing into other cities. How gratifying is that for you?
It's wonderful, but it's one step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited about that step, but I'm aware of how much larger it must be in order for us to be able to start getting the numbers like what we're seeing in Germany and in the States. And to me, it is a when, not an if, the next baby is found in anyone's area. And the thing is that a lot of rural locations, for instance, feel that they don't need this type of service there. But the thing is that most of the babies that are found in cities are found via homeless people looking for food. And if you have rural areas, there's just not the same amount of dumpsters, the same amount of people going dumpster diving, and the babies just aren't found. It's not that it's not happening, they're just not being found. So I think we really need to have a clear concept of the magnitude of this and keep focused on where we need to go.
All right, as we get set to put a wrap on part one of the year-ender, probably the biggest story that has impacted all of us, and quite frankly, probably the bane of our existence through 2023 has been Bill C-18, the Online News Act.
Yeah, and this is one of those issues where even I have a hard time getting my head around it, right? And I'm in the industry, and it impacts our business in a huge way.
Yes.
But it's complicated. Basically, this is the law that the Liberal government passed, saying that big tech should compensate media companies for the content that they steal, that ends up on Facebook, that ends up on Google. And it set off a lot of debate. Our company, for example, Village, doesn't believe at all that these companies steal our content, that we had partnerships and we worked with Google and Facebook to expand our reach so that we put our links up on Facebook.
Yes.
We put them on Google because we want people to come back to our local news. We want to reach local news readers in any way we can, whether the ones that come directly to our site or the ones that come to us through Facebook or through Google. And so this legislation forced big tech to come up with a plan to pay us. And it backfired in a huge way right off the beginning, right? Facebook blocked all news content in Canada. They said, well, we're not going to be a part of this law, so we're just going to block you. So our sites and every other Canadian journalism site, I believe every other news site in general, is not on Facebook for users in Canada.
Exactly.
They don't see news. So our users don't see the breaking news about a missing child or a fire that's impacted the community, or they're looking for a missing person. Anything that could be really important for readers to see, we're not seeing anymore. Whether it could be, people have talked about the example of forest fires in their community where you have to evacuate. Well, there's no news on Facebook about that, so we're not seeing it the same amount we would. A lot of opposition to this law. I've written about it. Our company's put out statements about it. Recently, Google decided that they would negotiate with the government to come to an agreement where Google's going to pay news organizations $100 million for the content that appears on their sites. It's not anywhere near what the government said they should have to pay. It was like $162 million.
Right.
And again, people way smarter than me have been looking at this. And basically our thought is that we're worse off now than before the law was passed. We were better off when we had our own private deals with Facebook and Google, and we had the traffic that Facebook and that Meta would give us. So really complicated thing, a really complicated issue. There's still a ton of unanswered questions about how it's going to unfold, but it definitely has impacted us, and it's put us in a position where we've been very public about the fact that for a little while we had stopped doing everything. We weren't hiring anybody. We weren't expanding. We put everything on hold because we weren't sure how this was going to impact us.
Yeah, Frisco, you talk about the smart people that we've spoken with, and one of them was Michael Geist. Michael, of course, from the University of Ottawa. He is an expert with all things regulatory and has certainly been outspoken where C-18 is concerned. We couldn't couldn't believe, and he couldn't either, that, was Facebook bluffing? What was plan B? And it turns out there was no plan B. And the economics, Michael, and you bring it up, and Jeff is certainly always in growth mode, as you know, and now he's the first one to say that it's going to halt new launches, it's going to halt new hires here at Village Media, and completely force him and the rest of us to re-examine the way that we do business. And I'm guessing that Village Media isn't alone.
No, I don't think they are. I think this has the potential to truly not just have an incredibly damaging effect on many media outlets, but I think undo many of the benefits that the government has now spent hundreds of millions of dollars on over the last number of years. I think, I'm not sure if it was Jeff or one of his colleagues from one of the other outlets, but the numbers that we saw raised before the Senate suggested that social media alone was responsible for driving about 17 to 30% of traffic for many outlets. And if you take that away and you take the ad revenue that can generate, the potential subscriptions that can generate, that's going to be significant for any player. And I can certainly recall Jeff saying that, if you took Facebook and Google out of the mix, he wouldn't have a business. And, that was, I thought, a stunning thing to say. And for some reason, the senators largely just seem to say, well, we just think it's a bluff and we're going to push forward, not recognizing that they're literally putting people's businesses at risk in doing so.
And no plan B in the process.
No, it's astonishing. No plan B at all. The minister, Pablo Rodriguez, has been repeatedly asked, what is the plan B? What if they aren't bluffing here? And it's, he says, well, it's a business choice. They can make the choice. We hope that they choose, but, that's not a plan. That's just hopium. And, I think I think the concerns here are very real. And I think they're going to escalate because there doesn't seem to be a real pathway back, certainly for Facebook at this point in time. As I say, they've been very consistent. They say that news constitutes about 3% of their feed. It's highly substitutable. And so the notion that somehow they're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in Canada for that link and for those links and open the door to perhaps similar kind of payments in other countries at a time when they too are laying off people seems utterly fanciful.
Back to wrap on part one of our year-ender here on Inside the Village. Derek Turner, Michael Friscolanti, Scott Sexsmith. Okay, next week, I'm really looking forward to it because it's kind of the lighter side of some of the stuff that we've covered through the course of the year. I think back to Mike Amadio from Sault Ste. Marie, Stanley Cup winner from the Vegas Golden Knights. Ron McLean from Hockey Night in Canada that joined us for a wonderful conversation. But probably the biggest lighter side story had to be the $48 million lottery winner from Sault Ste. Marie, Juliette Lamour.
You're totally right. And just to be clear, you scored those first two gets. Michael Amadio and Ron McLean you got. And Derek helped us get the big guest of the year, which was the $48 million lottery winner, Juliette Lamour. It's just a great team effort to get those guests on here. But Juliette's story was one of those where everyone in the province, if not the country, was talking about this story.
Yeah.
You have an 18-year-old woman who buys her first ever lottery ticket in the Sioux because her grandfather, who's played his whole life, said, you got to go buy a ticket. So she goes.
And didn't know how to do it.
Has to FaceTime her dad about how to do it and ends up winning $48 million. It's unbelievable. People, you can't even make that stuff up. So, and she went and did her press conference at the OLG headquarters here and came down here in the basement for a world-exclusive conversation, and it was one of the most fun conversations we've had this year.
Yeah, you're right. She gave one exclusive interview across Canada, and it was because of Derek that, to your point, she
Derek
came downstairs.
Secured the big interview, the big get, as
the
they
big,
say.
The big get, the big $48 million get.
But it was great. It's one of those things where you can't not be happy for that person or her family. Really nice people. It's not like, some jerk won $48 million. It was like, hey, this is a nice person. She wants to go to medical school still. She has dreams. She wants to do good for the community. Her parents and her sister were lovely people. They got to tour the office and meet everybody. And it was awesome because I left her at the Lottery Corp for the press conference. There's so many people there applauding her. And then all of a sudden they're here in our little basement just chatting about what happened. And I honestly, if I had to go back and write a book about it, I bet you it hadn't even sunk in yet at that point. I know she said it had sunk in, but I bet it hadn't. It's still only been a few weeks. And to have that happen is unbelievable.
I'd love to do a follow-up with her because that was back in February, March. Yeah. Thank you. Has it sunk in? What's changed?
We should have her back.
All right.
Derek,
That's one of many of the great stories that we covered in 2023. Okay, good job, boys. We'll do it again next week. Part 2 of the year-ender here on Inside the Village. And feel free, as always, to reach out to any of us 24/7 at ITV. You always laugh when I say that.
You can answer them at 4 in.the morning. You probably
know what?
would.
I would. I'm
you have a
usually
notification
up.
on your email.
That's right, just an ITV notification. Yeah. ITV at villagemedia.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer of Inside the Village, Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. We'll talk to you next week with part 2 of our look back on the year that was 2023.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.